An MP and the Mayor of London when the Brexit campaign got going, and an outspoken supporter of leaving the EU. Among his utterances were that Britain gives the EU £350 million a week, a claim he and other pro-Brexiters repeated often. It also appeared on the side of a campaign bus, urging the UK to fund the national health insurance instead. Now, a private prosecution has been launched by campaigner Marcus Ball, who crowd-funded to finance the case. Judges agreed that Boris Johnson should appear in court, while his supporters are calling it a politically motivated attempt to reverse Brexit. And of course, this all comes as Conservative leaders are jockeying because Theresa May has announced that she will step down on June the 7th. To discuss, we're joined by our correspondent in London, Holly Hunter. Holly, thank you for being with us. Firstly, so this is crowdfunding, a private citizen getting this going. Is that very unusual?
Well, anybody can bring a private prosecution, but what's unprecedented about this are many reasons, not least that this is a crowd-funded prosecution to the tune of £200,000 by a Norfolk businessman named Marcus Ball. But of course, the extraordinary thing about this is who Marcus Ball is bringing a case against. Boris Johnson, a prominent Leave campaigner, politician, and potentially the next Prime Minister. He's currently favourites on odds of 2-1 to replace Mrs May when she steps down, and he's now facing the very serious charge of misconduct in public office. Now, the charges relate to allegations brought by Mr Ball. They state that while MP and Mayor Boris Johnson deliberately misled the public by misrepresenting an amount the UK sends to the EU, which was both irresponsible and dishonest, he claims. Now, that amount that he's talking about there is, of course, the infamous figure that was emblazoned on the so-called Brexit bus, which Boris Johnson, a prominent Leave campaigner, stood in front of during the referendum in 2016. And it stated, "We send £350 million to the EU. Why don't we spend it on our NHS?" Now, that figure has been the source of contention since it first appeared. Prosecutors claim it never happened. That money was never sent or received from Britain to the EU or vice versa. We've not heard from Boris Johnson himself on this yet. We have heard from his lawyers, who obviously appeared on his behalf in Magistrates' Court. They've described this as a stunt they say, to politically motivated attempt to reverse Brexit. But the district judge threw out that argument. She says that there is ample evidence for this to be taken to trial and has summoned Mr Johnson to appear at a preliminary hearing.
I've heard fact checkers say the figure is closer to 280 million, so maybe 70 million off. But isn't this what politicians always do? They lie and exaggerate.
Well, yes, of course, politicians do lie and exaggerate. Boris Johnson's lawyers themselves claim that this figure was challenged when the Leave campaign brought it to the fore during the referendum in 2016. It was challenged and contradicted. Boris Johnson himself challenged and contradicted on this figure. That's the cut and thrust of politics. It's part and parcel of political campaigning, statistics used by different politicians to further their argument, which are then challenged by other MPs. And that is not the role of law to regulate political speech, as it could undermine the democracy. Now, many politicians have come to support that argument, describing this as bizarre. Ian Duncan-Smith, a Conservative, one of them, he says this is ludicrous practically and bizarre to bring the courts into political debate. Jacob Rees-Mogg, of course, a very famous Brexiteer, criticised this as a grave error and a matter of free speech. And there's no doubt that this could set a precedent, a very strange precedent, in that politicians could face legal charges for every lie or statistic that they use.
Yeah, and I understand this charge. I mean, if he's found guilty of misconduct in office, it's a serious charge. It's life.
Yeah, this is a very, very serious charge. As I stated, this is only a summons, I must stress. This hasn't yet been proven. Boris Johnson has just been asked to appear in court at a preliminary hearing, and it'll then go to Crown Court because of the seriousness of the allegation to face trial. Now, as you mentioned there, yes, it does carry a sentence of up to life, over 6 months to life. So we could be in the extraordinary situation where the leadership contest is, of course, set to begin, and Boris Johnson is frontrunner. Whilst he is campaigning to be the next Prime Minister, he could well be facing court, appearing in court and potentially facing a prison term.
So it could only go to trial once he becomes Prime Minister of the UK. What happens then?
Well, no date has yet been set for this, so we're unsure as to when Boris Johnson will have to appear in court. But obviously, with the leadership contest set to begin and him being favourite to become Prime Minister, it is likely that we will see him appear in court during one of those occasions, which is obviously unprecedented and would spell the end for his political career and, of course, leadership campaign.
Finally, just tell me a bit more about the worries about precedent. So this can't set legal precedent in the United States, for example, but imagine the motives or the people it'll encourage. Donald Trump accused of lying often. So could it encourage others? Is that the fear? And then of course, huge implications for free speech as well?
Yes, that's what many politicians here are concerned about. Many have kind of come to Boris Johnson's support, even challenging the courts to bring themselves into the fray over statistics and claims that they themselves have made. Ian Duncan-Smith was the Leave campaigner. He's challenged the courts to bring him to justice over this statistic. Again, arguing that this could really restrain the political argument and free speech. It's not the role of the law to define that here in the UK. And this is something that for Boris Johnson is obviously bad, very, very bad timing. It couldn't have come at a worse time for him. The leadership contest has not even yet begun and he could face court. Something he obviously denies the charges, but regardless, this is a distraction for him when he's trying to hone his message and convince not just MPs but the public that he is our next Prime Minister and the one to deliver Brexit, something Theresa May couldn't do herself.
Final question, Holly. So talk about that leadership race. When will Britain have a new leader?
So the leadership race has unofficially begun. Many have already stated their bid. They're wanting to replace Theresa May when she steps down following her meetings with Donald Trump on his state visit to the UK next week. Now, once she steps down, that triggers the leadership contest. MPs have already started aligning behind their horse, shall we say, as the race is well and truly on. That'll then be whittled down to 2 before Conservative Party members, 100,000 of them, vote on our next Conservative leader and, of course, Prime Minister. Now, the Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, of the opposition party, and the other opposition party, the Liberal Democrats, are calling already for a general election, claiming that the new Conservative leader wouldn't have the mandate of the country to deliver Brexit, as he would only have been voted, he or she, I should say, would only have been voted by 100,000 Conservative Party members, not the country. Many Tory members, however, would say that that would spell suicide for them. They fear they'd be forced out and vote as Labour would be voted in. So we could see a general election. A second referendum is still on the table. Many Tory MPs saying they'd favour that now over a general election. And of course, no deal is still very much on the table, more so than ever before, not least because Boris Johnson said or alluded to that is something that he would be willing to do, crash out of the EU without a deal. The only thing certain now, we are still leaving on the 31st of October as it stands.
Sure. All right. Thank you. An update from London, Holly Hunter there. And an interesting development in the UK.